Okay, hello, and thank you for coming to my GCAP talk. Before I kick off, I want to get started by acknowledging that GCAP 2022 is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. So, little bit oversharing first. I recently had COVID and it kind of hit my lungs pretty hard and I thought I'd recovered until I started practicing my speech. So I'm going to run out of air at some point and need to take a breather. I'll leave you on some nice slides so you can look at something pretty, but if I seem like I'm about to pass out, don't worry, I've practiced this. So the talk today is slacking off or running a remote asynchronous international studio, which from this point on I'm going to call a race. So that's what that means. So I'll talk a little bit about why we did it in the first place. I'll talk about how our process works, the problems, and there are problems with the way that it works, and some closing thoughts. And we'll have some questions afterwards. What you don't see on the screen in front of you is a prescription on how to make it work. All I really want to do is show you what we did and get you thinking about other ways that you could be running processes. This is not a talk where I believe I have all the answers. Okay, but who the hell is this lady? So I'm Amanda Schofield. I'm the Managing and Creative Director for Studio Drydock. I've worked in the industry for about 16 years. Most of that time has been at Fire Monkeys, which is an EA studio here in Melbourne as well, on The Sims Freeplay. So I've worked in programming, design, I've worked in production, and in a lot of roles where I was managing larger teams, around 50 people. And you thought you were coming to a process talk, you're not. This is a plug. Welcome to my plug for Wylde Flowers, which is the game we just launched, our very first game as a studio. It's been 3 years in the making. It is a witchy, cozy life sim. And it's available for PC, Switch, and Apple Arcade. So if you haven't checked it out, please. It's our pride and joy, and we couldn't be prouder of the way that people have received it. I hope you have a lot of fun with it. You are going to see so much eye candy by the end of this presentation, you're not going to be able to help yourself. So it took us about 3 years to develop. It was a team of 25 at the high watermark. Our first title, as I said, and it was across quite a lot of platforms. For those who aren't familiar, Apple Arcade is iOS, Mac, and Apple TV. So that's quite a lot of platforms. I feel like we put this process that I'm about to describe to you through quite a lot of paces. To get to this. It's a pretty massive game. It's about 30 to 60 hours of gameplay, depending on whether or not you romance characters. 18 hours of voiceover dialogue, thousands and thousands of assets. Okay, so why did we do it? Well, in 2018, it looked more like that. So the co-founder Alex and I had spent 6 months bringing these jelly beans to life and making Wylde Flowers the prototype in preparation for pitching it to get funding. And neither Alex nor I is an artist. So we needed a little bit of help to get it across the line. And so we knew that we needed people who were very senior who were going to help us define the look of the game. So we couldn't just hire Joe anybody to come in and whip out a few assets. We also knew that we needed it very quickly because at this point we were living on 2-minute noodles, people. So so we knew that we needed to get it in front of publishers. What this meant was that it wasn't a good candidate for trying to hire local talent. As much as I would love to support the local games industry, anyone who has tried to hire any kind of senior in a short period of time knows that it's just not feasible. So we decided that we would throw the job internationally as a short-term contract for quite a few positions. And most of those positions we had to shut down within 5 days because we were getting so many hundreds of applicants. We actually didn't have enough time to process them as 2 individuals. But it was more than that. They were very senior, some of them 15, 20, 25 years of experience, very targeted experience with the kind of games that we're building, which is not necessarily true in the local space. And more, they had setups at home where they were comfortable working from home. They knew how to do that. They had lots of experience with being remote. Why? Revolution. They're freelancers. So there's another talk that I could have given, and I know Jonathan Blow and a lot of other people have had success in taking a small core team that invents a game, and then they bring in a bunch of freelancers just to finish it off. That's not this talk. That's not what we did. We said to every individual freelancer, you are owning your department. You need to tell me what your department is going to be doing to contribute to this game. And they were delighted because no freelancer is ever told that. They're told you're going to do this in time, you're going to do it within a schedule, you're going to do it exactly the way our art director says that you will. So what I think freelancer is a misnomer for what we turned them into. They became a part of our core team. They just happened to be on a contract. So not freelancers, but maybe work from home OG, yeah? We absolutely set this up. This was 2018, so people were telling us we were absolutely crazy to be running remote. They don't say that anymore. So the prototype that we put together was fabulous, and it was perfect. But more than that, the team was working really, really, really well together. They were gelling. They had that magic secret sauce, the lightning in a bottle that makes a really good team, a really great team. And so Alex and I looked at each other and we said, well, what the hell are we going to do now? Our original plan was we were going to set up a brick and mortar office like everyone else would. And now we had this incredible team who were contractors at the time, but obviously needed to become our senior leadership team. And they were spread across Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Costa Rica, and America. And we really wanted to keep them, and we really wanted to run in this way. And so it seemed to us like it was more of a risk for us to drop that team and try and do something local than it was for us to try and figure out a way to make remote work across that scale. So we had to put some processes together. I will go into those processes, but first, Shelby here and I are going to jump on a soapbox and have a little talk to you about the way that offices work at the moment. So as I said, I've come from massive studios where processes work very well. They are very efficient. They are great tools. I understand that. However, they do rely heavily on meetings. And this is a list of all the people I can think of off the top of my head who are disadvantaged every time you set up a meeting. In particular, I want you to, pour one out for the managers at the bottom whose calendars are impossible to try and fit one more meeting into today. This is how things happen over several courses of days because you just can't get a hold of the key stakeholders. So meetings are fabulous because you get a whole lot of bunch of people's ideas really quickly. You get to come to a decision, everybody hears it, and you walk away. At the expense of all of these people giving you their best selves. So my question is, how many of our meetings are actually that? How many of our meetings need a decision quickly, need a decision on the spot, need everybody's opinions to be heard right this second before we make the decision? Because if that's not what you're doing in the room, if you're just giving a seminar, as I am right now, you're not having a meeting. That's not what you're doing. So what I want people to do is really think about, even if you don't have any intention of running an asynchronous studio, think about how many of your meetings actually need to be meetings, or if they're just set up that way out of habit. And try and think of the people on your team who you're disadvantaging because you've set it up that way. Breathe in. This is Shelby. He's voiced by Darren DePaul, nicest man on the planet. So how we do it, unfortunately, I don't have any whiz-bang magical, you've never seen this before tools that I can show you. We use everything that you use. We just think about it a little bit differently, maybe. So Google Docs, for all our processes and design, they're written up once they're ready. They're shared on Slack with the entire team. I'll go into that a bit more later. So anyone can read them and they contribute using the comments and reviews in the same way that you would have used in Google Docs. The difference is we give 24 hours from the moment that the document drops until we make any decision. And what that does is it means that all of the time zones, so the practical thing is all of the time zones are able to come online, have a look at the document and give some feedback. But it also means that people who have English as a second language have an opportunity to read through the document. It means that people who are introverts, who maybe don't like to jump in with their first thought that comes into their head, have an opportunity to kind of think it through. The programmers can actually figure out whether or not what's written in the document is feasible instead of just guessing in the room whether or not something is feasible. Here's an example document. It's, like I said, nothing to see here. It's not terribly fancy. This one was from a review of, we did a play test and some of the writing wasn't landing quite the way we wanted to, and so we're discussing alternate solutions to some of the problems that were raised. Once those decisions were finalized, they would have been transferred into the document. So we have a similar process for art and other graphical assets. They're reviewed entirely through Slack. So this is an example of a ruined barn, which is on the farm when you first start the game. And the artist is presenting it, having already workshopped it with a smaller group of artists in another Slack channel. They're reviewing it with the whole team. So you can see in that Slack channel a whole lot of the conversations that you would normally have in a meeting are happening. So there's a sidebar where somebody makes the suggestion we should add mice. The animator's like, hell yes, we should add mice. And so there's a little sidebar on that. I think at one point, one of us is running around inside the map and notices that there's some occlusion problems. So there's a sidebar a little bit further down where we talk about some different ways that we could position it so that those occlusions weren't a problem anymore. But mostly what you see is a whole lot of people cheerleading, a whole lot of people being very excited. This is a process that all of you probably had to adapt over the last 3 years. If you have a stand-up, look, I have a confession. I hate stand-up. I hate it. I always have. I hate the sidebars that happen where two people solve a problem while we all stand there and watch. I hate the people who mumble into the floor. I hate the people who say the same 3 words every day and you still don't know what they mean. So I've always had a problem with it, but I actually love Slack stand-up. I think this is a great solution. We did it because it didn't make sense for all of us to start our day with a team meeting, because some people on our team's days start 12 hours offset from my day. So we drop into Slack, into the stand-up channel. We say what we're going to do today. This is also heavily redacted because I took this from 4 days ago because I was lazy. So I had to redact it on 3 or 4 separate occasions. So there might still be some content in there if you want to know what's coming up. So you can see that everybody pops in, they say what they're doing today, which means when you get up in the morning, you have your coffee, you drop into the Slack channel and you read what everybody's done who started earlier in an earlier time zone. Then you contribute your bit so that people who start later in the day see that as well. But I think it has advantages. So that top one, we have one person who works from a couple of different locations at different times of year. And so she's pointed out that she's back in Costa Rica so that the team knows that her time zones have changed again. Further down, those sidebar conversations that I actually hate, as a producer, I understand the value of them because sometimes those conversations don't happen if they don't happen at that moment. Now they're in a thread, so those people can work out the problem that they've identified. None of the rest of us have to read it if we're not interested. And this is one that I don't think a physical stand-up can resolve, which is right towards the bottom. You can see that one person came in the morning thinking they were doing one task, and then their producer popped by and said, no, you're not. This is more important today. We've suddenly had an emergency and this needs to be done. So she updated it. So this is how we think about asynchronous work. It's not that we're creating new processes. We're figuring out how existing processes can be adapted so that they work for lots of time zones and they work for lots of people in different places, in different locations. Now, if there are any artists in the room in particular, but probably most of you, you're hearing what I'm saying about like sharing your work with everybody and reviewing by everybody and that sort of thing, and there's a little pit in your stomach that's developing, which is fair enough, because nobody wants to stand in front of a firing squad, right? Nobody wants to jump in and say, here's my work, and everybody says, nah, not sure about that. So when we decided that we were going to build a studio that was asynchronous and that our processes were going to depend on everybody sharing in a public space, the first thing that we decided was that we were going to need a high level of EQ, that everyone on the team needed to have a lot of empathy and a lot of support. And that's not an easy thing to say, just like bring people in and I hope you're really nice to people. So our onboarding process is so specific about this that there is detailed instructions on how to give feedback to somebody. So that if you've never had to work in that environment and you use just firing from the hip or whatever, then you see what we mean when we say that. Myself and Alex, we comment in almost every channel every time something goes up. We're the first cheerleaders on the scene. We're the first people to say, this is so great. I'm so excited about this work. Oh, this is going to make such a difference in these ways for the player. And through that, they're able to see that that's the culture that the founders expect, and they emulate that behavior. So our leads who had worked with us during the prototype were already emulating that behavior. So by the time we brought on everybody else, there was just an expectation. You would see what was written. There is no way you would drop into one of our art channels and say, I don't like it. That's not to say that we don't give feedback. That's not to say that we don't give feedback. It's just that if the only time you give feedback is negative feedback, it's very easy for a relationship to deteriorate. But if every time someone posts something, you say, I love that, because you do, and the only reason you normally don't say anything is because you didn't feel like you added to the conversation. If every time you say, I love that, then the one time you say, I think it could be better if we added this, they listen, they believe you, they know that it comes from a good place. Another aspect that's really important, because we're an international studio, is that there's kind of a new kind of microaggression. So you should be watching for microaggressions in your culture anyway. That's an important thing that we should all be aware of in this day and age. But there's a new one, which is geographical. So what we don't want is for Australia to be considered the HQ and America to be an offshoot. So it's simple things like, on my Friday, I will say something like, I hope you have a great weekend if that's what's coming up for you, or that your Friday is pleasant. Instead of just saying, have a good weekend, which is what you would normally say on a Friday. Because if I'm sitting in America and it's Thursday for me, I'm kind of like, well, that's not really applying to me. So it's something to think about when building these kind of massive cultures across international boundaries. You need to be aware that your biases will also affect the way that they perceive their value to the studio. So the important takeaway from this slide is cheerleaders first, problem solvers second. I don't think I need critics, but if I have to have a critic, absolutely last. So for an international studio, terrifying thing that happens is that onboarding often happens with the lead not being online at the time that the person starts. So we have people whose leads are in Australia. Their first day, starting in America, they're going to be online for 6 hours before the Australian comes online. So what we do with that is that we create lots of tools to kind of help them through it. Think about it like tutorials on the internet. So we set them up with a buddy that's in their time zone that can provide kind of general housekeeping help. But we also do things like this video that's playing on the left, which is our lead artist, Ben, is walking through, I believe this is a substance tutorial on how our process for substance works. We have nearly hundreds, I think. Yeah, no, 200 of these sorts of videos across various different departments, from everything from how to resolve a Git conflict to how to work Unity to how the art pipeline works. So day one is a lot of documents. It's a lot of, if you get blocked on that, move on to that task. If you get blocked on that, move on to that task. So we have kind of week-long onboarding that we feed out to people. It's a lot of work, but honestly, we should be doing this anyway. You know, people don't like having to ask questions hundreds of times on their first day. It really helps them if they can teach themselves, if they can take ownership for their own learning. I am not a process purist. I do not believe that any process should be used in isolation. There are great tools that meetings are used for, as much as I gave it a bit of a hard time earlier on. Socializing is impossible when you're building a team internationally without face-to-face time of some kind. So for us, that's the gathering. Yes, we build a game about witches. So once a week, we have enough time zone overlap that we can all be in the same space for about 2 hours. It doesn't really matter what people say. I just want everybody in the room to talk, so we tend to do a show and tell, which is just so that everybody can hear how people are, how they speak, so that you can assign that to their dialogue when they're talking in Slack. And there are people who do one-on-ones. There are people who run fortnightly team meetings where their entire group will come together. And ad hoc meetings are definitely necessary when a problem just can't be solved or we need it really quickly. So we don't completely eschew these tools. We just use them when the time is right and when we know that's the right tool for the job. So I guess if I were to kind of sum up, even though this is not a prescription on how to make a race, if I were to sum up how we did it, the culture is the first thing. If you don't build the culture to support the race, it will fail, which means a lot of change management and a lot of exhibiting the behavior that you want to see before you even start the rest of it. You might as well let staff choose when they're going to work their hours. This process requires a great deal of trust to be put into the people who are going to be using it. And so what difference does it make to me if I'm asleep when somebody starts? They can start at 9 a.m., they can start at 7 p.m. if that works better for their schedule. This means we get side benefits, like, you know, people can pick their kids up from school and take care of them for a few hours and then finish off their day in the afternoon. But that trust will pay dividends, and I'll talk about that later. You need to give them as much autonomy and authority as you possibly can. And the reason for that is every time they need to check in with someone, there's a 24-hour turnaround before they can continue that task, which means a lot of task switching. So the more responsibility they have for their own work, the more they're able to kind of problem solve on their own. When I say that we let people choose their own hours, I mean that. I mean that to my very core. So the moment that Alex and I celebrated the studio the hardest was when we got this message in Slack, which is that this person saw that it was a really nice day. He lives in Massachusetts, so he doesn't get a lot of those at that time of year. And he saw that it was a nice day and he decided he was going to take off. I'll finish my work on Saturday. There is no reason not to do that. It doesn't matter to me. They know they're going to do their 38 hours at some point. So they do it when it makes sense for them. And they can because it's an asynchronous process. So they know that things will be there when they get back. So the obvious con to this system is that everything happens more slowly. I don't know that that's a problem, though. I mean, we're building games. This game was built over 3 years. So there were assets that were designed a year before they were implemented. There are not many decisions, aside from those that come up right before we're about to make a milestone decision, there are not many decisions that need to be solved on the spot in a game. It's not life-threatening. Written communication skills are a must-have. There is no way to get around that. You cannot run this process with people who are not capable of communicating over Slack and through documentation. So we have a fairly stringent hiring process where that's one of the first criteria that we use to raise whether or not someone will get through to the next round. Pros, anyone can be involved in discussions. So the bigger that the team gets, when we got to the point where we're about 25 people, it would normally be where most of those kind of review meetings would happen in silos of teams. Because it's just not feasible for you to be in every review conversation across the studio and still get your job done. But with the channels, and we have an art channel, we have a narrative channel, we have UI channels for all of the different types of disciplines that you might be reviewing, you can self-select into those channels and decide to comment on those things if it's important to you, if it's meaningful to you. I'm just going to keep saying this. Core hours are mostly irrelevant. The only core hour we keep is the 2-hour block that we use for the gathering once a week. And these are the things I didn't know to expect. What I'm calling live cultural diversity. So normally when we have a bit of a melting pot team with a lot of different cultures, we've transplanted people into our current location, into our culture. These expats then have to be ambassadors back to their hometowns or their home countries. Our team lives their lives in the culture that they're representing, which means we see what they eat, we see what they do with their weekends, we see how they spend their time, and we're able to kind of live those lives a lot more closely. Worldly perspective and ideas made it into the game as a result of this. Some of the narratives were driven from events that happened in New Zealand, despite the fact the writers were in America. But it also meant that things like book references that are part of the curriculum of education in America, every child would be expected to know those book references, don't land with anyone outside of the States. And so the team would say, we don't get it. Yeah, and everyone getting a say was another unexpected benefit. So I'm going to run through a whole lot of problems that I haven't figured out how to solve. So just as personality types struggle in a meeting situation, there are plenty of personality types where this would not make sense. So anyone who finds written communication difficult, that's a given. They cannot be comfortable in this space. People who derive most of their social interaction from the workplace. I mean, we definitely have channels that we dedicate to socializing, but if you're not somebody comfortable with that kind of almost chat room-esque socialization, then it's kind of hard to pick up those relationships. We find that people kind of lean more heavily on their external relationships, which I think is healthy anyway. But yeah, if you come to work every day to kind of get that out of it, then it's very difficult to get that in this space. And if you have someone who's in an office situation is already struggling to tell you about the problems that they're facing, or communication in general, just they're kind of lacking that, it transfers over when they come into this system. It's just as hard to get it out of them in Slack as it was when you were talking to them in person. So I know there's a philosophy that ever since the pandemic, people have been worried about the lack of control as managers we have over people. And everybody has a horror story about people who kind of take advantage of a lack of oversight. And I'm sure many of you can think of those sorts of things. But my experience is that if I trust and respect my team, they respect me. They want to do well. They want to succeed. They want to work their hours. In fact, I would say there's a much bigger problem with my team working overtime and me trying to police that than there is in them trying to work fewer hours than they should. Yes, I'm looking at both of you. yeah, so people become invested, and they love that that you care enough about them. They can tell that you care about them because you care about their lives. You care about them living their lives. So they want to care about the things that matter to you as well. Troubleshooting. So anytime there's a Git conflict, somebody's computer breaks, Unity just doesn't work for this individual, but it's working for everybody else. There is nothing to do but wait for an engineer to come online and screen share with them. There's kind of no getting around that. Troubleshooting has to be in person. We have significant numbers of troubleshooting documents to try and alleviate that process, but there's always going to be things that go wrong, and this does cost time. Most people are pretty good at having 2 or 3 tasks on the go. One of them they can switch to while they're waiting for that Unity problem to be resolved or for the Git thing to be resolved. But there will still be, context switching time that goes into that. Scale. So the biggest size that this got to for me was 25 people. And at that point, I could see there were a few people that I was making more course corrections on culture with. I think it would be a real challenge to do this quickly, to scale from 25 to 50. I think you could do it slowly because, as I said, the leadership team was exhibiting the behaviour that I was trying to impart on the team, and they would pass that on to their team and pass that on to their team. But the more leads you have to hire, the more quickly, the less likely it's going to scale. I guess that's true in any process change or culture. Just with work from home, I haven't solved how to socialise and celebrate. It's a real challenge. We launched a couple of weeks back, so we still haven't had a party for it. I've never tried to convert an existing studio. This was a brand new studio that I set up, so everyone coming in had to agree to this as part of the process of coming into the studio. But I have some theories about things that I think might go wrong for you if you were trying to change manage into this space. The first is that whenever people are stressed or under pressure, they have a tendency to fall back on the safe processes they've used in the past. So kind of being there to support them, to be like, no, we can still make this work. This is still the course of action that we're going to take. Will stop it from kind of devolving back to what you were before the first time you try. Every new person that we brought in, especially if they worked in production or something like that, which is very process heavy, needed quite an adjustment period to think through, because you're kind of reinventing the wheel on a lot of stuff. Like even just the stand-up process was a big deal. Trying to think about how we were going to achieve everything that we were going to do in a new way. So expect that every person that comes into this process is just going to need a little bit of time. A question that I hope you all take home with you, regardless of whether or not you want to be a hybrid studio or a fully remote asynchronous studio: when do we need to have an answer to this? Because that should tell you whether or not the meeting needs to happen. That could tell you whether or not you could be using a document instead, or a Slack channel. For hybrids in particular, there's another microaggression that you have to be aware of, which is the on-site people versus people who are not on-site. You will always favour the people that are in the room that you can make eye contact with. So be careful if you're going to do one of those hybrids that you're not alienating the people that aren't in the office. So I'm not saying this process is the best. It has a lot of problems. It works really well for me. I'm also not saying we should throw away offices and just move to this. I think there's a place for both. I think if you are an incredibly social people surrounded by incredibly social people, this would be horrific. You would hate it. And I think that there's space in the industry to have both. I think we should let people decide what kind of people they are and whether or not they would rather work in something like this or whether they would rather be in an office surrounded by people. All I really want is for people to start thinking about whether or not maybe the processes that we've been using up until now aren't the right ones to move forward with, now that we know that some amount of remote work is going to be in our future indefinitely. So, and that's the end of my presentation. So thank you so much. I will open it up for questions, but if you could please come down to the microphone at the front so that the recording can pick it up, that would be great. Oh, no!
Hello. So for the past year, I've been working at a remote asynchronous international studio, so it's very relevant to what I've been doing. The topic of feedback and how anyone can give feedback and feel comfortable to do so has been a massive problem for us. People aren't comfortable giving feedback, especially because it's so public. It's so everyone can see it. Everyone can, people get that. Especially the scenario where someone says, "I love it," and then immediately someone follows with criticism. The person who says, "I love it," now feels like they just messed up. How do you fix that? That's been like a massive problem for us.
So the benefit and also the curse of an indie studio like mine is that to some degree there's always going to be a cult of personality around the founders. And if not them, if they're not present in the room, the next level down. All cultures work this way. They trickle down from the top. So if you are there in every conversation, you're pulling feedback out of the people that you know are going to be respectful about it. Hey, Desiree, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good direction for us to go? Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. I think we could do it. But maybe what we should do is just adjust this. They'll start to see the behavior you want to exhibit. But I did absolutely take some people aside and remind them of how I would like to see critical feedback. There should never be a time when someone says, this is great, and then someone says, actually, no, it isn't. It should be, this is great. I can see how a lot of people would feel this way. I wonder if certain people who are in the audience, not me, some people who are in the audience might feel this way about it. It's a question. It's not a fact. Mm-hmm. So it's just about helping with the soft skills that they need to learn. And once they see it enough and they see that you're rewarding the behavior that you want to see, people will follow along.
Oh, thank you.
Hi. So we've got a company which is mostly remote. We haven't had an office for the past 2 or 3 years or something now. One of the difficulties that we've found, and I'm not sure whether or not this is something that you came to find as well, is with juniors. You said that you started off with mostly senior freelancers and things like that. Did you end up having any people come on that were more at a junior level as well?
Yes. Plug. We are hiring a junior engineer right at the moment.
So I guess one of the things that we found was that what we didn't anticipate was that lack of kind of on-site physical presence. You lose things like being able to look over someone's shoulder and just give them advice and be like, oh, what are you clicking here for? This is the hotkey that you could be using, or why are you doing that kind of stuff? And we found that as a result, not being fully prepared for this whole thing, we didn't kind of give our juniors the support that they needed over the past year or so. I was just wondering if you had any advice for that.
Yeah, so the first thing is we don't give juniors to people who are not already very passionate about training juniors. For that reason, because they need to do all the work, they need to do all the reaching out. So the first very junior person that we brought on was coming across from a completely different industry. They were fresh out of university. In fact, they were still doing their course. And so that was in an animation position. And so they had dedicated a one-on-one for, I think, twice a week, where they would just sit down and workshop some problems with a screen share environment. But for the engineering position, which is straight out of university, we don't expect you to have any qualifications. In fact, we don't even need an engineering degree. We need you to have spent 2 years doing some programming wherever that was. We wrote a test which was written in our proprietary scripting language with a huge tutorial on how to use our scripting language, and then asked them to do something in the game. What that told us is that we knew they'd be able to work out of the gate using our tools without a great deal of oversight, and everything after that would be a growth opportunity. So none of those tasks would be time critical. We'd be able to talk them through changing things in Unity if you were adding a new feature to Unity, which meant that we'd be able to switch to one-on-one kind of support where it made sense, even if they were in a time zone with only a couple of hours overlap.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your talk. I wanted to say I was also in a team pre-pandemic that was working in a globally distributed thing, and it was pretty interesting going into all of this change now and sort of seeing everyone's mind kind of be forced to change, I guess, to some degree. Now in a sort of a global environment that's gone through some of that change, I've implemented a lot of what you talked about, and that's been going really, really well. But I had one thing that sort of stuck out to me was you mentioned that as part of your hiring process, you're actually trying to filter for people who are going to work well in this kind of environment. And my curiosity was, have you also implemented that as part of your competency matrix, or how you actually measure performance of employees around that? Is that part of how you measure performance? And yeah, I guess what are your thoughts around that?
So at this stage, we're not measuring performance because we've not been around long enough to have those kind of growth opportunities within the studio. That's something we're going to have to face shortly. But having come from a company like EA where that's very well understood, these things would be written into any document that we wrote about what a mid-level would be. And it would only grow, the section would grow. I would expect that not only are you able to be supportive, to be able to give good feedback, but you'd be able to bring other people into the dialogue. You'd be able to write documentation that other people can read so that they can understand how to use the tools and that sort of thing. And then once you get to the senior level, then you're able to actually impart this culture to a group and course correct people who are not doing it properly and those sorts of things as you grow.
Yeah, fantastic. Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hi, long time no see. Yeah, during the talk, there were a lot of things you talked about with the culture that I thought were really good ideas, especially like the cheerleading first, and I loved that onboarding documentation. But all this sort of from the perspective of someone who's at the head of a company, do you have any advice for how to try and bring changes like this into a company culture when you aren't at the helm?
Hello, fire monkeys at the back of the room. So I believe strongly that all culture needs to come from the top. So I think the best thing you can do is, if you believe in this sort of thing, is to advocate, to spend time with your leads and with the senior leadership of fire monkeys to say that this is something that you want to see. You want to see these kind of cultural changes. You have to convince them, because if you do a great job in your immediate area, it will blow apart the instant that other people get pushed into that space and have a different way of thinking. So you really need their support to help.
Thanks.
Hey, how many leads did you have when you had a team of 25? And where was the decision-making lying? Was it with the individual or the leads? And
Yes.
did it work?
So leads, we had one per discipline, and it was very flat because for most of the time there was only one or two maximum other people in that team. The environment art team was the only exception. The buck stops with the lead for that discipline and the creative director, that's me. So what that meant is that we had an opportunity to mediate. If you had a whole lot of people who had different perspectives, and this happened to the concept artist all the time, no, we should take it in this direction, no, her jacket should be blue, then we were able to come in and go, those are all interesting perspectives. I think that maybe we should try it in this direction and see how that goes, just to kind of protect that individual. But in most cases, they were only ever suggestions. And so the decision-making process was with the author of the content. They were able to say, I will take this feedback, I will not take that feedback.
Cool, thanks.
Hi.
You touched on some of the downsides to everyone being able to get involved in every discussion. One of the problems we've seen with just asynchronous discussions in general is that sometimes you have some people who get involved in too many discussions or get roped into too many discussions and then kind of spread themselves thin. Have you seen similar problems or have any kind of strategies you've developed to deal with that?
I've not seen that happen. I think because in most cases we're talking about art or reading a document. It's quite a small team, so there's not enough throughput of that where it's taking up somebody's day. If it were the case that I was getting people and there was one case where somebody wanted to do some concept art for something or other, we often have artists draw over something and say, this is how I would change it if you were to try and implement what I'm talking about. And that's totally fine. But if I got the sense that people were starting to, spend too much time on that, then my question would come back to, how are your tasks progressing? Like, we have some deadlines coming up. Do you think you're on track for that? If the answer is yes, and they want to spend all of their time, helping the rest of the team be better, then I don't have a problem. If they're not meeting their deadlines, then that's a different conversation. And this is just one symptom of that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the talk. As someone who's been in hybrid kind of studios traditionally been remote, I've kind of seen firsthand of like how the benefits of being hybrid versus being remote. And I'm just wondering, like, I know that like your team's spread out across the world, but like when you've got like, say maybe, I don't know, about 10 people of your team being in Melbourne, for example, have you ever used any opportunity to have some face-to-face kind of time together? I know you probably don't have an office, but yeah. Just curious.
Only in social settings.
All right.
Because what I don't want is to have a really great dialogue about directions we should take the game that everybody else missed out on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we will grab lunch or a dinner or something like that with the people who are in Melbourne. I know the people in New York were doing that sort of thing, and some people on the East Coast as well. Just to get some more social time.
Oh, cool. No, thank you.
And that's it. Thank you so much.